Good afternoon. Just getting the other parts set up. Hope you are doing well.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
How's your family?
We're all doing well, thank you. And you?
Everybody's hanging in there with both hands. It's been hard, but we're hanging in there. Yep. We're praying hard for Israel.
Yes, I know. It's a very painful situation.
Yes, it is.
I know.
Yes, it is.
We're going to give it just another minute or so, and then we'll get started one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that more people will be joining and logging in when they are available. I think the technology is working because you and I are here. And it looks like there are some logged in through YouTube. So let's go ahead and get down to the class. Before we begin with the regular part of the class, I wanted to begin by reading Psalm 122 together. Psalm 122 is a psalm that is associated with the city of Jerusalem, but through Jerusalem, of course, it is connected to all of Israel. So Psalm 122 is a psalm that is often said during times of strife, during times of war and conflict, as a way of expressing our hope for peace for all of Israel. So you're welcome to find it on Sepharias or in any other collection of Tehillim, of Psalms. But we'll begin with Psalm 122.
122. Yeah.
122. A song of ascents of David. I rejoiced when they said to me, we are going to the house of the Lord. Our feet stood inside your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem built up, a city knit together, to which tribes would make pilgrimage, the tribes of the Lord, as was enjoined upon Israel to praise the name of the Lord. There the thrones of judgment stood, thrones of the house of David. Pray for the well-being of Jerusalem. May those who love you be at peace. May there be well-being within your ramparts, peace in your citadels. For the sake of your kin and friends, I pray for your well-being. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I seek your good. May there be peace for Jerusalem soon and for all of Israel. May the horrible and crazy fighting calm down so that people are able to actually discuss whatever it might be that is troubling in order that true resolutions can be found. For true peace is never found by firing rockets at those with whom you have an argument. Ironically enough, I had planned for today's class to be about the topic of mourning, which we will continue. Of course, the original schedule was set before I knew that there would be such cause for grief and mourning, so much loss of life in Israel during this recent battle. But of course, this is something that I had intended would come as the counterpart to the discussion of the afterlife last week. Just as last week's class focused on what happens to our soul when we move to the world to come, this week is meant to focus on what happens to those that are still here, the loved ones that are still in this world, even as our soul moves to the next world. So mourning, the pattern, the style, the laws of grief is a very important part of Jewish tradition. It is a very important tool for not only understanding Jewish spirituality, but helping people through what will be the most difficult moments of their life in a way that is humane and inspiring, but still acknowledging the grief. And I just want to make sure that's clear very much from the beginning, that even though all of our discussion last week was about the beauty of Olam Haba, the beauty of the world to come, the timelessness of the soul, the perfection that we are able to achieve and all that is coming, we still like this world. We still like this life. We still like being with our family, being with our friends, and enjoying the blessings of this world. And so when a person dies, even though the deep part of us knows that their soul is still alive in the world to come, we, those who are here, miss them. And we grieve, we cry, and we go through the other forms of mourning as a tribute to them and as a recognition of our pain. We don't cry because we are afraid of what comes next. We cry because we miss them and because we wish they could still be with us in this life, even knowing that they will be with us in the next world too. So Judaism takes mourning very seriously because we take this world, this life, very seriously. So let's go through the process. And it is very much a process of moving through step to step to step. So the first process is known as aninut. This is the process between the death and the burial, when a person has died, but they are not yet laid to rest. And during this process, our focus is entirely on their needs. Now, throughout these different steps, we are going to be focusing on the people that are required to engage in mourning, for whom this is halakha, this is Jewish law, that they must mourn for those that have passed. Mourning is required for your parents, your siblings or spouse, or for your children. If you were to imagine a circle around a person, the people that are in the immediate branches of your family tree, those above, those alongside, and those immediately below you, those are for whom we must mourn. Now, you might be wondering, well, if I lose a grandparent, aren't I sad? If I lose a grandchild, God forbid, am I not sad? If I lose a brother-in-law or a sister-in-law, or even a mother or father-in-law that maybe has been very dear to me, would I not mourn for them? And then I want to draw a distinction here between legally required mourning, what was called halachic mourning, and mourning in the usual sense of grieving, as it's used in the English term. Legally, a person is not required to mourn for any beyond this immediate circle. Emotionally, a person will, of course, mourn and grieve for those that die that are dear to them. You may notice that friends is not on this list. Does that mean we are heartless when a friend dies? Of course not. It tears us down deep into our heart. But we are not required to perform the different stages of mourning that we will discuss. We are only required for these. Now, why did the rabbis believe that the Torah limited for whom we are obligated to mourn? Because unlike in the modern world, where we are blessed with better science and medicine and forms of nutrition that allow for stronger bodies and health, for most of human history, death has been a constant companion for most people. To lose a parent before you were even an adult, to lose siblings was commonplace, to lose a spouse was not unusual, especially if it was a woman in childbirth, and to lose children, as painful as it is for us to even contemplate, this was commonplace, and many, many children would not even be able to survive infancy before they died. If we were required to mourn for everyone beyond this immediate circle, to mourn for our grandparents, for our in-laws, for our cousins, for our grandchildren, for our friends, we would be in a constant state of grieving, a constant state of mourning. There would not be a single year where we would not be mourning. Indeed, even in our modern time, where we are so much better cared for and able to extend life and prevent so many of the tragedies of the past, many people will visit the cemetery still multiple times in a year to say goodbye to friends or extended family. If they were forced to fulfill the obligations that we are going to describe, there would be a never-ending cycle. Additionally, if a person is forced to mourn for all of those in the extended family and circle of friends, then it makes it hard for us to prioritize how to give consolation and comfort to those for whom the loss is most acute, and that is closest to them. This is why even in the modern world, you may choose to mourn for someone else, but not only is it not binding, but you should be careful in choosing to mourn for someone not obligated, because sometimes that will overshadow or take away from the mourning and the grief of those that are obligated. For example, when my grandmother died, may she rest in peace, which is the most recent relative that has passed in my family, my mother and my uncle were the primary mourners. Of course, I cried, and of course, I was there for the funeral. But had I tried to take over the mourning and do all of the rituals that we will describe, it would have pushed my mother and uncle's grief to one side. Instead, I grieve as a grandchild, but not as a primary mourner. And that allowed the focus of attention and of providing comfort to go to my mother, who I was spending most of my time with, so that she could receive the comfort and help from the community. And that is something that is very important. We need to make sure that even as we are sad, that the focus of the community goes to those who need the most strengthening at that moment. And so there is a reason behind limiting the requirements of mourning, both to prevent us from having too much grief and also to prevent us from prevent us from blocking or derailing or sidetracking the comfort that needs to go to those who are in most of need of it. So it is optional to mourn for others. It is possible. But if you have any questions or doubts, please ask me, and I can try to guide you in those other circumstances. But for parents, siblings, spouse, or children, yes, the mourning is obligated as we go through. Is that clear? Everyone okay on that? All right. So for onanut, for the people that are in this category between the death and the burial, there are a number of restrictions. They do not eat substantial meals. They don't eat meat or wine. This is not a time to sit down to a feast, of course, because your dead one is right there in front of you. They need to be attended to. They also are freed from doing the Shema, from wearing tefillin, or any of the other positive commandments, the commandments that we must do, as opposed to the commandments we must not do. This is in order to make sure that we focus all of our attention on taking care of the needs of the deceased. We do not have marital relations, we do not bathe, and we do not anoint, wearing perfumes and other colognes, again, because we should not be either enjoying ourselves nor engaging in vanity and self-pampering. We do not go through joyful activities. We don't get a haircut or shave if you're a man. We don't study Torah because that is considered to be joyful. And we don't engage in business because, again, all of our focus should be on taking care of the needs of the deceased. At this time, either at the moment of death or at the funeral, there are different customs in different communities. Usually in the Temple Israel community, we do this at the funeral. We engage in Kri'ah. Now, Kri'ah is the oldest form of physical display of mourning. Kri'ah is literally the tearing of clothes. We tear on the left side of our garments when we are mourning for a parent. We tear on the right side when we are mourning for any of our other relatives. Now, the reason we tear on the left for our parent is because this is closest to the heart. And as our parents are the two people who brought us into this world, who gave us life, they have a position closest to our heart because they are literally the building blocks of ourself. For all others, we have the other side of our body to remember them. Now, that torn piece of clothing, or in the modern situation, many people will use a cloth that is attached to their clothes because many of our modern garments do not tear so easily. That torn piece is worn throughout the entire Shiva period, the 7 days, as we'll see. Before we tear, there is a blessing that we recite. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, dayan ha'emet. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who is the true judge. This is a reminder that even at our moment of greatest grief and pain, that we do believe that God is a true judge. As we talked about from our afterlife class last week, we believe that God will see the true nature of our loved one, and that God will, of course, help them to move into the world to come. After Shiva, after the 7 days, it is permitted to stitch the piece of clothing, to partially close the hole. And then after Shloshim, after 30 days, it can be repaired completely. Modern clothing cannot usually be repaired completely intact because we have amazing sewing machines and all of the looms. But in the ancient world, it was easier to patch the homespun type of wool. However, for a parent, we would never fully repair it, even if we could, to make sure that there was always a reminder in our clothes. Just a little bit of reality reminder, in the ancient world, most people only had 1 or maybe 2 garments. And this would mean that once a person had lost a parent, there would be a visible reminder with them constantly of their loss and a constant reminder to others that they may be in need of consolation, of comfort. The burial itself should come as soon as possible. We do not delay very long at all. In Israel, where the Jewish laws are easier to observe because the government is a little bit more compliant and the funeral homes are more prepared, and where the country is much smaller, funerals can take place on the same day as a person dying, or maybe just the next day. Here, it is often the next day or 2. We do still try to bury as soon as possible. If necessary, we can delay if it is an issue of safety, something that is an unfortunate problem right now in Israel in certain communities, or if we can ensure that the primary mourners will be able to attend if we push it off just another day or so. This will allow them to be present for the burial and give more kavod, more honor to the person that has died. But we do not delay just out of convenience. We don't delay just because we have something else we're doing that day and we'd rather reschedule. The funeral is the most important thing that needs to be done, and it is done as soon as will provide the best honor for the deceased and should not be delayed unnecessarily. Again, if you are in the situation, you please talk to me and I will be happy to guide you through how to make sure that it is done as quickly as possible. At the funeral itself, we do have many customs. One of them is to give a hesped, a eulogy. Technically, the eulogy can be given anywhere. This is the speech memorializing the person, reminding us of their goodness and their positive traits, and it reawakens within us the grief that they are gone. Now, local customs will vary as to where we do this. This may be done at the graveside or in a memorial chapel. And in Temple Israel's culture, we will often do it at the cemetery, either at the chapel there or at the graveside. But we have had eulogies done off-site as well for different reasons. Whether it is done off-site or on-site, everybody should also be willing to escort the deceased in the process known as levaya, taking them to their final rest. This might be following along in the chain of cars, following the hearse to the cemetery, or as is more common with Temple Israel, moving from the memorial chapel to the actual gravesite and following in a line behind. You may think that once the eulogy is done, that our duty is done, we've heard about how great they are, let's go home and leave the burial to someone else. But no, helping a person reach that final rest, helping them to be laid within the earth where they can be fully absorbed back into the world that gave us life, This is an ultimate act of kindness, an ultimate act of bringing peace to them and to the mourners, and all of us should be willing to participate. Again, because the person is being absorbed, as I just mentioned, we bury them in a simple wooden coffin where required. Again, in Israel, you do not need even a coffin, and a person is simply wrapped in a cover. And we do not use any materials that would prevent the returning of the body to the earth from which we were made. Judaism believes that the body returns to the earth and the soul returns to God, and both need to be allowed to happen. So we do not go in for metal caskets and copper and brass and iron and all of the other fancy things that you'll sometimes see people use. Instead, simple wood, the simpler the better, with as little of a possible barrier keeping that person from the natural process of release. In that same theme, we do not use embalming, and we don't conduct autopsies unless it is required by local laws. So we can, if it is absolutely required, but if it is not legally required, then we do not do this. All of these customs are based around our respect for the body of the deceased. We believe very strongly that the body is a sacred object that has housed the sacred soul, and as such, we want to treat it with respect. We do not leave it lingering around. We do not puncture it, embalm it, or mummify it, or do all the other things that were done in other cultures. And we do not take souvenirs, again, which was done in many other cultures. Instead, we try to return them as quickly and as naturally as possible to the world. This is also why Judaism is very opposed to cremation, because it destroys the body unnecessarily and renders it impossible to be absorbed by the world naturally. The ash is not good for the world or environment. And it's also why Jewish law is against above ground mausoleums. We want to bury people in the earth and under the earth, not in a building above ground, because we want them to return to the earth. Questions or comments? Okay. So let's talk about the first period now, back for the mourners, the Shiva period. And this takes place for 7 days from the burial. The first day is the day of burial, and the last day is then the morning of that 7th day. So during Shiva, there are a number of observances. The most commonly noticed is stay home. I cannot emphasize this enough, but you will be able to grieve more carefully, more deeply, and more fully in a long-term way by spending the 7 days at home. Do not go out shopping, do not go out hanging with friends, do not go out for other things. Let other people take care of those things for you. You stay home and grieve. Now, because they are staying home, that means they cannot come to services to say Kaddish, which we'll talk about later, or to participate in community life. That means we go to them. When Shiva is taking place, the person is at home and the community moves to them. We'll have much more to say about that later. During Shiva, the 7-day period, we again continue no haircuts, no shaving, no marital relations, no bathing, anointing, or wearing leather shoes. We don't wear freshly pressed clothes because that's just trying to make ourselves look good. We don't eat festive meals. Of course, you still eat, but we're not going to sit down to a party dinner. We don't have purely social activities. This is not the time to get together to play bridge, mahjong, or poker. We don't go in for our business or take care of our work emails or any of those things. And it is also customary to sit on low stools or on the floor itself, and to light a candle or a lamp that will last for the 7 days as a reminder of the spirit of our loved one. And it is also a custom to cover mirrors in the house, since the mirror is usually used as a way of preparing ourselves for joyous activities or preparing ourselves to be intimate with our spouse. And as you saw during this time, that should be the furthest from our mind. So Shiva is a time where we deliberately make things hard on ourselves so that we do not have distractions and we don't have things cheering us up. We don't have things taking our mind off of our loss. We allow ourselves to grieve. It is clearing your calendar of every distraction, making sure that even physically you're not feeling too comfortable, so that you will do the hard work of remembering the loved one and feeling that loss, recognizing that they are gone, and allowing yourself to work through all of the emotions that come so painfully and so fully at this time. Unfortunately, in modern general culture, there are so many people who believe that you just need to celebrate life and get over it and move on, and all the other ridiculous platitudes that try to erase the feelings of loss and pain and sadness. That is emotionally unhealthy. It is spiritually inappropriate. And if you don't spend the time grieving for them here, then you will end up spending time in therapy later on. Make sure that you give yourself the time to feel the loss. This is part of how we show our love and part of how we say goodbye to them and how we begin to learn to live in a world where they will not be physically present with us. It is not easy. It's deliberately not easy, but you will find yourself much better off in the long term if you allow the wisdom of our history to guide you in this time. Now, for people that are not actually the mourners, the biggest question is always, well, what am I going to say? As we talked about, the community comes to visit those that are mourning. The community comes both for services or just to spend time with them during these 7 days. But what am I supposed to say to them? Well, there are really 3 things to remember. The first is there is a traditional greeting. If you attend Friday night services, either in person or virtually for the last year, you'll know that I have been including this phrase as a reminder of us to reach out to those who have lost, especially during the time of COVID when being together physically has been hard and hundreds of thousands have died prematurely. But this is something that can be said at any time. Hamakom yenachem etchem betoch sha'ar avelei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May the ever-present, meaning may God, comfort you along with the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And what this phrase is trying to say is, first of all, don't say anything stupid. Say this instead, because people do have a tendency to say stupid things when they are visiting those that are grieving. But it is also reminding the person that is grieving of some very important truth. One, that God is with them. It is very natural to feel like you are alone and that God has somehow punished you when you are grieving for a lost relative. This is reminding them God is there and God is going to help provide comfort. Indeed, my presence is a part of that. Additionally, we remind them that they are not alone in grieving, that others within Zion and Jerusalem, others within the Jewish people, and of course within all of humanity, they also grieve. You are not the first to experience loss, and you will not be the last. Other people can help you because they know what this is like, and you in turn will help them and others too when they go through loss. Trying to make sure that they do not feel alone and isolated is the primary goal of Shiva. They need to feel the loss, and we need to make sure they don't feel alone. That is the double emotions of this time. Now, you may want to say more than that, but I will remind you of the words of Rav Papa. The primary reward for attending a house of mourning is for the silence. Again, shut up. If you want to know the mitzvah of bringing comfort to somebody who is grieving, all you have to do is show up, be there for them, sit with them, hold their hand, an arm over the shoulder. Don't think you have to fill the silence. Don't think you have to draw them into conversation. And please don't think you have to distract them by talking about something unrelated. Hey, did I tell you about that new book I'm reading? No. You are not there to entertain them. You are not there to humor them. You are to make them laugh. You are not there to make them forget. You are there to be whatever they need you to be. And the first thing to be is silent, because you won't know what they need you to be if you're blabbing and talking and trying to just throw words at them as though that's going to make everything better. Be quiet and listen, and let them guide the conversation. They will indicate if they want to talk about the loved one. They'll indicate if they want you to talk about something else. That's okay. Let them guide the conversation. If they say, hey, have you read any books lately? That's okay. Now you can talk about it. Now you can share that with them, because for whatever reason, that's what they are hoping to get from your moments of conversation. And if they just want to sit and cry, sit with them and let them cry. Hand them the tissues and the Kleenex. Be there for them. Don't tell them it'll be okay. Don't tell them it's fine or he or she is in a better place. They know all of those things. Right now, they don't need to be reminded of that. They just need to be reminded that they have a friend. They just need to be reminded that they're not alone. Be there with them. If they open up the conversation, let them guide it and be there for whatever they need. Has everybody got that? I say this all the time, but it's so important. Okay. So Shiva is the first 7 days from burial. Shloshim overlaps and goes until 30 days after the burial. So burial is day 1 and Shloshim is 30 days later. My fingers were out of the camera view. So what happens, what continues during Shloshim? So we continue to not have festive meals. We continue to not have purely social activities. This is not the time to go to a concert. We continue not having haircuts or shaving. Excuse me. And we continue not wearing freshly pressed clothes. Now, many do also have the custom of continuing to not bathe, or if they are going to bathe, to only do so in cold waters. Now, this is not universal, but you will be able to tell for yourself whether the bathing is meant just to distract you, or whether the bathing is because you are becoming unbearably uncomfortable, or certainly if the bathing is necessary for hygiene. Shloshim continues for those 30 days. And as an example, when we get to the end, it is customary to wait for a friend to suggest that you get a haircut or that you trim your beard. This is another way where our friends and extended family are helping to guide us during this time. But now you'll notice that the friends are beginning to guide us out of our grief, beginning to guide us so that we can re-enter our normal practices and life. This is the next step. We go through the intense period of Shiva. We are staying home. We are not doing work, all of that. And then we move to Shloshim. We are back at work. We are back to going to synagogue as usual, but there are still some strong limitations on what we are doing. And then at the end of that, our friends or extended family are helping us make the next step out. So this allows us to have that gradual process of grieving, becoming accustomed to the loss, and then re-entering the world in a little ways, a few steps at a time, and knowing that we are still supported during that whole period. Now that, shocked me about how bright this slide is. Maybe I'll change the color next time. That is the end of mourning for everybody except parents. Now this is, I'm going to turn it off the bright slide because it's just too bright for my eyes. The ancient laws that we have had for thousands of years say that for a spouse or a child or a sibling or anyone else that we are mourning for except our parents, that we mourn as an obligation only for 30 days. Now, again, this is part of what I mentioned at the beginning of tonight's discussion, that for most of our history, if we were to mourn a full year for everybody that is on our official list, of course, not even including others, then we would still be mourning for a large portion of our life. If in the ancient world, when infant mortality was so high, if a person had to mourn an entire year for every child that they lost, they might be mourning for 5, 6, 7, 8 years of their life during what would have been still a relatively shorter life. If they had to also mourn for every sibling, and families often had somewhat large families, then that might add an additional 4 or 5 years. If they had a couple spouses, that would be an additional few years. And on top of that, to have their 2 parents, you might end up spending 20 years of your life in mourning. That would be perhaps a third of a person's life. That was not what we wanted to do. Life is meant to be lived. Life is meant to be enjoyed. Life does belong to the living. And as much as we grieve for the loss of others, we cannot allow it to take over our life. However, in the modern world, where death has become a stranger to us, thank God, it is perfectly fine and possible for a person to mourn longer than the 30 days for a spouse, for a sibling, or for a child. And indeed, in most of those instances, if asked, I will encourage a person to mourn longer than the 30 days. Because mourning has become so infrequent, it is often necessary for a person to spend longer in order to fully appreciate and come to terms with the loss. And because each person, we have fewer of the different people in our lives, it is more painful when we lose them. So certainly it is permitted to continue to mourn longer than 30 days for the other relatives. It is required for parents to go for the full year, but we should not continue the mourning process that I'll continue to describe for longer than 1 year, because there does need to be an end. There does need to be a final time where all of our mourning practices are finished. And that is at the longest 1 year from the time of burial. So what continues during that year, during those 365 days from the burial? Well, we continue not to have festive meals. So you would not be inviting friends over to watch the Super Bowl together and have your pizza. You would not be going to your friend's birthday party celebration or any of those things. Now, this may seem hard. And yes, it is supposed to be hard. These are some of the reminders that allow us during that year to continue to recall the loss in a smaller way than the intensity of Shiva or Shloshim, but in a way that will allow us to feel the loss in these smaller ways, but able to then learn how to deal with it, how to cope with it, and how to continue in life honoring the loss, but moving towards normalizing our life. But you can't do that if you don't spend some time like this. We also continue to avoid any purely social activities. So like I said, having your Super Bowl party, you're going to want to skip it that year. If it is a social activity for a mitzvah, there is a wedding, a bar mitzvah, a brit milah, the circumcision of a child. If there is something that is celebrating a mitzvah, then yes, a person should attend and be there to celebrate with the rest of their family or community. But for other just social activities, take a rain check for the following year. There is also a custom throughout that first year to change your seat in the synagogue, to move from wherever you normally sit to another place, just as another reminder of the disruption that has happened because of the loss. Questions or comments? Okay. Throughout our mourning process, we have an additional aspect called the Kaddish. If you are familiar with the prayer book, the Kaddish is a very frequent prayer, but there are certain ones of the Kaddish that have been set aside and being reserved for those that are in mourning to be able to say them in honor of their loved ones. Now, for most of our relatives, as we talked about, a person would lead Kaddish in their community for 30 days, going along with Shloshim. For our parents, a person would lead Kaddish for 11 months, sort of, in their honor. And I'll explain that sort of as I explain the reason for Kaddish next. So as we talked about in our class last week, the period after death is a time, at least from our perspective, where time continues normally, of judgment for the soul. And as we talked about last week, a person's soul might be going through this judgment for up to a year. In order to help the soul, we perform mitzvot in his or her honor. What this means is it shows the lasting impact of their deeds in this world. So this is why I say Kaddish for my relative. I do not hire another person to say Kaddish on their behalf. Kaddish should be performed by the family member. This is very important, and unfortunately, there has been a new tradition in some communities that has crept in of people trying to pay others to fulfill this obligation. Spiritually, it doesn't work. Psychologically, it doesn't work. You need to say the Kaddish because it is showing that this person, this spouse, this parent, this child, touched you in a way that you are acting out of how they touched you. And how they touched you is to stand and lead Kaddish. That is showing to their credit the impact they had. That only works when it is you, the person they touched, that is behaving in that way. Now, since parents have the greatest impact, because they are the people who raised us, and they are for whom we have the greatest respect, we recite Kaddish for the whole time of judgment, for that whole 12 months. However, the custom has been slightly adapted, as no one wishes to imply that their parents need all 12 months of help. Most communities traditionally end the Kaddish 11 months from the time of the burial. So this is our way of saying, I will give as much assistance as possible to my parents, but I'm not going to give so much assistance that it looks like I am concerned that maybe they need every bit of it because they're a terrible person. So it is a little bit of a compromise. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying Kaddish the full 12 months. This custom is a custom, and therefore, if you really feel the need to say it longer than for the 11 months and go the full 12, that is perfectly fine. But again, I will repeat, it is absolutely best to stop at the year anniversary of the burial and to say Yartzeit, that annual reminder of their passing, and not to continue saying Kaddish afterwards. If you have more questions about that or personal need for discussion, please contact me individually. Now, the Kaddish was chosen as this opportunity because it is a central statement of faith. If you read the translation of the Kaddish, you will see that we don't actually say anything in the Kaddish regarding death. The Kaddish is silent on the subject of death, but it is very much a statement of our faith and belief in God. The Kaddish is also a prayer that requires a minyan, that is to say, 10 Jewish adults. That means that we are declaring God's greatness publicly. We are making a statement not just privately in our heart, but we are standing in front of the community and saying, I believe this about God. Since the congregation responds, we are also leading others towards God. So in these three ways, we are making some very important statements. We are saying, I believe in God. We are saying, I believe God should be publicly shared with my community. And we are saying, I believe that my community should also grow in their connection to God. This is why the Kaddish was chosen, because uniquely among the short prayers, it has all of these unique features. The Kaddish also, psychologically and socially, has another aspect to it. It forces us to be with other people rather than be alone. Because the Kaddish requires a minyan, the Kaddish then demands that we not say this remembrance only by ourselves. There are other prayers we can say alone. There are other your own personal reflections that are fine to be said alone. But the Kaddish does ask that at least a few times each day, we are going to be with other people rather than just being by ourselves. The Kaddish also demands us to confront our feelings about God. If I have to say again and again what I believe about God and God's greatness, like I said before, that may be difficult, especially at the beginning. I may feel betrayed by God. I may feel hurt by God. I may feel punished by God. None of those things are true, but I may feel them. By having these moments again and again and again, it gives us a chance to actually think about our relationship with God and work through those emotions. In the same way, for many people, it also gives them a chance to work through their feelings towards their parents. Whether the relationship was perfect and amazing and wonderful, or whether the relationship was tense and more difficult, the Kaddish allows us to have these moments of reflection where we do not have to approve of everything our relatives did, but we can come to grips with the fact that they were a soul that shared part of our life and journey together, and as such, they do deserve at least a modicum of reflection and some acknowledgement from us, even if it is only to acknowledge that they were deeply flawed and perhaps even hurt us. The Kaddish gives us a chance to say that we understand that their flaws are something that is ultimately going to be in the hands of God, and that it is through our connection to God and through our connection to Torah that we will learn to avoid their mistakes and to rise above whatever pain and grief they might have caused us directly. Kaddish, of course, also encourages us and asks us to then participate in daily prayer and reflection of a broader nature, not only the saying of the Kaddish, so that we are able to think about life in a more general way, to experience life in a more general way, not only among other people, but seeing the world broadly, all of our hopes, our dreams, our worries that go beyond the concerns of just the grief that we have of that loss. Any questions about the Kaddish so far? Oh, I see there was one in chat about saying Kaddish for a spouse. So the legal requirement, the chiyuv as we call it, is to say Kaddish for 30 days for a spouse. And the option, of course, is there, especially for those with whom we've shared many, many decades of our life. If a person needs to, they emotionally, they can say Kaddish for up to the year. Once the year has passed, then, just as we do for our parents, we should say Kaddish on the anniversary of their death, what we call the yahrzeit. We should also say Kaddish during the Yizkor services, which are the memorial services that are included in Pesach, Shavuot, coming up next week, Sukkot, and Yom Kippur. Any other questions? Either feel free to put them in chat or to unmute and participate. All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming this afternoon, whether it be in Zoom or YouTube. And I look forward to seeing you again. A reminder, like I said, that we don't only have Shabbat this weekend. Beginning Sunday night with the Federation Community Program, we will be welcoming Shavuot together. That will be a Zoom program. And then Monday morning and Tuesday morning, we will be having in-person services that are also live streamed for our celebration of Shavuot. If we can't remember what Shavuot's about, go back a few classes and watch the recording.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I wanted to just add that I found the process, that's our tradition, extremely comforting. It really helped.
And not to remind, but you are not alone. I have heard from everybody who has gone through Shiva and Shloshim and the process of mourning that it really makes a difference.
It does.
And I have heard from many people who didn't avail themselves of the wisdom of our traditions that they really wish they had, that they rushed so quickly to recover and to get on and move on, that they never properly allowed themselves the time to grieve. And that made it much harder for them to really begin to reconnect to life in that new way with their loved one gone.
Yes.
Thank you for
Absolutely.
sharing that, Roberta. Thank you.
Rabbi, at what time is the service on Monday and Tuesday?
Services will begin at our usual 9:30 morning start.
That's on Monday and Tuesday.
Monday and Tuesday morning, 9:30.
Okay.
And they will be both in person, masks and social distancing required, as well as in the live stream.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.